This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers, scholars, researchers and people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a social scientist at Amsterdam University College in the Netherlands, who is now working to lay the theoretical and institutional foundations for a new academic discipline, occupation studies, in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course. She is now joining us on the line from Amsterdam. Dr. Hilla Dayan, welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you. Good morning, Gilad.
So tell us, what is exactly occupation studies and how is it different from other parallel disciplines like post-colonialism, for example?
Yes, that's a good question. By the way, this title is completely unofficial and has not been inaugurated.
It's a working title, as they say in showbiz.
Yes, exactly. Let me say it this way. In the past few years, let's say a decade, we've seen a flourishing of scholarship on the goings-on in the OPT, in the occupied Palestinian territories. And it is interesting that Israeli scholars have taken this up quite seriously. There's works that are by now internationally renowned. They've influenced a number of fields. The existence of this system of occupation for almost 50 years has been really not the purview of academic interest of anyone. But since, let's say, a decade ago, roughly speaking, it has become really clear that this system is moving towards becoming more and more permanent, and therefore I think this generated an interest of scholars, both Israeli and international, and of course Palestinian scholars.
And because it's becoming a phenomenon to be reckoned with, as it were, it needs to be theorized. Is that the logic?
Needs to be theorized, but beyond theory, I think what drives most people, people have different motivations for conducting research, obviously. I can say more specifically about Israeli scholars that investigate and research the mechanisms of control, the practices of Israel in the occupied territories, the logics behind them. I think that our main concern is to really understand and not take as a given what is going on there, to interrogate it, to study it, to learn from other contexts and other similar systems of
exactly on that, Hilla. So from a theoretical and scientific point of view, what is really unique about occupation studies? Why can it not be pigeonholed in, I mentioned post-colonialism before, but what is really so special about the occupation that justifies the erection of a new discipline?
Again, as I said, this is a difficult and a highly debated premise, right? That it's unique, that it's different, that it is not like other systems. I happen to be one of the scholars that think that Israel has erected a unique regime of separation. By the way, there's also a tension between analytically looking at it as occupation or defying the paradigm of occupation and thinking about the whole regime in the whole of Israel-Palestine as something else. And I happen to be investigating the paradigm of occupation very closely and very critically. Becoming more and more convinced that we have to look at it differently, that we have to look at it as a different and unique type of regime. But okay, this is again a subject for debate. What is unique about it? Is it unique?
I'm asking your opinion and your point of view.
Yeah, in my point of view, studying also the apartheid enabled me to actually really come out of the analogy with a stronger conviction that Israel's system of rule is different, is unique, is reinventing some of the principles that are, of course, familiar from other situations of colonial rule and apartheid, but is really unique in the mechanisms and in the principles
such as what are
mass disenfranchisement.
Okay, what are these unique features?
What are these unique features? Well, I think that separation in the Israeli context doesn't have, let's say, if you only look at it from an economic rationale, from the point of view of controlling population, which is like the Foucauldian governmentality, let's say, framework, then yes, you can say it's not different. But I think that something has happened, and the occupation has become the raison d'être of the Israeli self-definition. The definition of the state cannot live without it. There's this incorporation of this logic of control into the very survival self-definition of the nation, of the system, which you can call a dual regime, a regime that has some features of democracy and some features of dictatorship, military dictatorship. This is a unique constellation, the combination of democracy and long-standing dictatorship.
But we have to take into account, Hilla,
very peculiar Israeli features.
We have to take into account that Israel existed for 19 years is not a very long time, but it existed without the occupation for a while. So what you're saying is that it's a process that's become irreversible?
1948 and exactly June 1966, there has been a military regime, and it was in place to control the Palestinian population that remained after ethnic cleansing in 48. So, except for a few months between 66 and 67, in which there was no system of occupation officially, we can speak of a consistent occupation from 48 onwards, and in the sense of the logic of having the democracy and dictatorship in some kind of form of interrelationship ingrained within the system of rule that was in place since 48.
So what you're saying is that this weird combination of dictatorship and democracy, which is really, as I understand you, the underlying premise of what you call the occupation paradigm, is really inherent to Israel, to Zionism, and you cannot theorize or imagine a different Israel?
I didn't say Zionism. I said the system of rule in place since the state was founded, right? We talked about 48.
Yeah. Let's
not take it as a defining truth about Zionism that might be true, that it's part of the logic of Zionism, but I won't get into it because I didn't study it as carefully as I want to in the future.
So you're not talking about the ideology, you're talking about
to look at Zionism as a state ideology. Mm-hmm. But yes, you're right that I believe that since its very foundation, the state has had this dual logic of democracy and dictatorship. What Ernst Frenkel, one of the Frankfurt School scholars, have theorized as the dual state, in which the normative state is always under or always functions in relation to the prerogative state, in relation to what is necessary to the state, which is not democratic.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you about yourself. You're an Israeli scholar teaching in Europe right now. I'm wondering about this choice because it might have made more sense to argue and theorize and launch that campaign within Israeli academia because it is much more pertinent to social science in Israel than in the Netherlands, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, Gilad, and that brings me to speak about the general context of Israeli academia, which I think is really interesting. By the way, I see myself as part of Israeli academia. I define myself as an Israeli sociologist, and I'm, of course, in close contact with my mentors in Israeli academia. I'm a product of Israeli academia, so I don't see myself as extracted out of it and not belonging to it. Evidently, this is my background. This is where I come from. That's my where my intellectual roots are. Tel Aviv University is my alma mater. But unlike my generation in Israeli academia that really grew up or came to edge academically in the 90s, where there was some liberalization of thought, where there was some breakthrough in terms of critical thinking and redefining paradigms that were really staunchly exacted on students and on other generations. Yes, I think that we can speak of a flight, you can say, of Israeli academics like me that have a very difficult time coming back. I've studied in the U.S., and I just simply could not imagine having the chance even of coming back and making a difference within Israeli academia.
Is it because of your ideas or because of the scarcity of...
the persecution and the marginalization of this type of knowledge that we have developed, that is critical Israeli academics have pursued for a decade, that has been growing and has led to a situation in which many of us seek jobs outside of Israeli academia.
But more fundamentally or more substantially, when it comes to the ideas that you yourself are trying to promote within Israeli academia, that you say has suffered some process of the closing of the mind recently, there are those who argue, and there's quite a few of those, who say that the Israeli academia is really the last bastion of cutting-edge ideas, of trying to unravel the existing order, etc.
Sure.
You don't subscribe to that call.
Well, look, I know many of my friends and colleagues there, academics, are engaged in extremely important and critical and very, very in-depth studies of Israeli society and its system of rule. So I won't say offhand that we have to kind of that we can't speak of a free, let's say, academia, but we have to also take into account that most Israeli academics and the Israeli academia in general as a whole, as an institutional whole, is deeply implicated in the occupation and its perpetuation in so many ways. It has direct links with the military. It supports the military and not underrepresented populations in the Israeli society. Entire disciplines like archaeology is involved in direct production of knowledge that allows the dispossession of Palestinians in the occupied territories. People who are ethics experts decree that it's okay to force-feed the Palestinian hunger striker. So there's manifold ways in which the Israeli academia, as an institutional whole, not to mention its complete oblivion to what is happening to academics and to students and to universities in the occupied territory. There's many ways in which Israeli academia is complicit with the occupation. So I think we should
Hilla, also
disregard the fact that there's critical production of knowledge within Israel, but to call it a bastion of free thinking is to ignore how deeply embedded academia is in the perpetuation of the regime, in the occupation itself directly, and that I would plea for looking into it much more closely than Israeli academia has done so far.
But what you're saying is almost a given if we follow the logic that you present. Obviously, the academia, and that's not only in Israel but in every country, is part and parcel of the larger scheme of things. And if it is a state institution after all, it is a public institution, so it only makes sense that it would follow the public opinion or the state logic that you've presented.
It does make sense, but what doesn't make sense is to then hypocritically argue that it is not. And this is what people have been doing. They have been saying, no, Israel is a democracy. Look, at the universities, we have critical knowledge being produced. And that is hypocritical to argue this, as well as to argue that that it only makes sense that it's reproducing state logic. Now, the thing about academia is that it not only reproduces the hegemonies of Zionism and neoliberalism, by the way, very strongly so, but it also reproduces social injustice in the sense of being restricted more and more, encouraging more and more technocratic thinking and encouraging the closure of the mind. Mm-hmm. And so I think that in that sense, yes, Israeli academia suffers from many global ills of academia. There's really an overwhelming crisis of academia at the moment, which I'll be happy to talk to you about at length. So Israel suffers from it. It's global, but there's a tinge of an extra added value that Israeli academia gives to a particular and really a unique system of oppression. And in that, we cannot absolve it simply by saying, yes, it only makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense, because it needs this logic which the entire social order is based on, is premised on, needs to be defied and needs to be treated as ungiven, as a political logic that we can unravel, that we can rethink, that we have to challenge as academics and free.
Okay, so let me ask you one last question, Hilla. Yes. Say that theoretically or not, you are offered tomorrow a tenure-track position at your alma mater.
I'll take it.
You will take it, even though it will make you complicit with the...
Absolutely. By the way, I'm complicit where I am. I'm complicit as a Dutch academic because in my university, my pension fund as an academic, I'm bound to a pension fund for the entire academic sector that invests in the occupied territories, and we could not, even though millions of people have pressured this pension fund, we could not convince it to divest. And so I'm complicit anyways. I'm complicit as an Israeli abroad because the state is using me and my community here in Amsterdam in order to further its propaganda. So the complicity is overwhelming, and you cannot escape it outside and inside Israel. So, but the question is, what do you do within current conditions to defy it, to challenge it, to expose its hypocrisies, and to undo what you can undo as an independent thinker.
All right.
And so I'll take, of course, any opportunity to teach in Israel, because I see it also as a giving back and my social responsibility to the society where I'm from. And I see education as a tool for freeing of the minds and challenging the existing dogmas.
Okay, for all the heads of departments currently listening to us, heed Hilla's call. Dr. Hilla Dayan, a social scientist at Amsterdam University College in the Netherlands, and I would say co-founder of a future discipline tentatively called Occupation Studies. Thank you very much for...
That's a big responsibility and challenge, and I'm happy to take it.
All right, lovely. Thank you very much for
this opportunity.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I am Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye and Shana Tova.
לאן הלך, אהובתי? אני ממש לידך. איפה האמא? האמא שלי, אתה מזמן לבדך. מה עם השמש, הטוב והרך? שקע כמו שזרח. אם כך ספרי לי אם כך. הכל סופר ונשמר, תויק ודווח. אני שומע שוב פרשים, אינך שומע דבר, וריח מר עולה מן הרעשים, והוא ילך ויגבר. מדוע קר לי כל כך? זה לא מאוד מסובך, את מוכרה לי אבל רחוקה. אתה ליד עצמך, אני ממש לידך. בדיוק כל זה מתרחש?
בזמן שכתבתם שירים,
ומה איתה אם כבר מדברים?
נותרו למי שזוכרים. אם כך בעצם דבר לא קרה, אם כך הכל קשורה,
תמיד היית עשוי לפשרה. אתה שובר את ליבי, אני ממש לידך.
אם זהו רק תרגיל, זה אכן תרגיל מוצלח. השמיים צבועים ואני לאופן מפויר, הכל חוזר אדום יותר באלונקות ובפרחים. אמרי האם, אמרי האם, לאורך הגדה שואל ותיק הלל, מפקדים גלויי מג"ב נפלו להתפלל. הרוח האילם הלם, ילדה חמקה מן המסגד.
החושך התאסף ולא ירד.